All right, so we're back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at, I guess you could call it the intersection of biology and technology. Really, though, it feels much bigger than that.
Yeah, you could almost think of it as like the power to rewrite, the power to recode life itself. Like, what does it even mean to be human in a future where that's even possible, you know?
Right, right. And the sources that we've been diving into for this episode, they're really painting a picture of what a lot of people are calling the next phase of human evolution, which, I mean, that sounds so grand and almost like sci-fi.
Yeah, it's definitely a big concept, but I think the thing that really struck me was how many of these things that we're going to be talking about are already happening. I mean, we're not just talking about hypothetical stuff here. This is real world science and technology.
Exactly. So our mission, I guess you could say, for this deep dive is to really pinpoint the most interesting and thought-provoking aspects of this whole intersection of biology and technology. Like, what does it all mean? And we want to help you, the listener, really wrap your head around it.
Yeah, because it can be pretty overwhelming, all this information. There's just so much going on.
Right, right. So we're going to try to make it as clear and engaging as possible. So let's start with something that sounds super sci-fi, but is actually becoming more and more real every day: bioprinting.
Okay, so think of it like this. Bioprinting is basically 3D printing, but instead of using, plastics or metals, we're using living cells, what are often called bioinks. And the incredible thing is that these cells can actually grow and connect with each other, so you're not just printing a shape, you're actually building a living structure.
So it's like a biological fabrication lab, almost. And the crazy thing is that we're already seeing some really amazing applications. Like they're bioprinting eyeball corneas to help restore sight. They're bioprinting hair follicles for people who are dealing with baldness.
Yeah, and they're even using bioprinting for things like personalized cosmetic testing, growing skin in a lab so they can test different products on it.
That's wild. And of course, there's the whole thing with using bioprinting to help heal wounds, especially combat wounds.
Right, right. That's a huge area of research right now. But if we zoom out a little bit and think about the future applications of bioprinting, it gets even crazier.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with the crazy.
Well, imagine like 3D printed coral reefs designed to regenerate marine habitats. Like we could actually start actively rebuilding damaged ocean ecosystems. It's not just about fixing what we've broken anymore, it's about actually rebuilding nature.
Okay, that's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, and there's even this idea of using small robotic space stations as bioprinting factories because apparently the microgravity environment in space is actually really good for printing with liquids.
It's like the future of manufacturing is in space.
Exactly. But I think the most exciting applications, for me at least, are the ones related to the human body. I mean, just imagine a world where we can bioprint organs on demand to address the organ donor shortage.
Yeah, I mean, that would be revolutionary. No more waiting lists for transplants.
Exactly. And they're also working on creating what are called organoids, which are basically miniature organs grown in a lab using a patient's own cells. And you can use these organoids to test different medical treatments to see what works best for that individual.
Wow, so it's like personalized medicine taken to a whole new level.
Exactly. And then there's the whole area of bioprinted prosthetic limbs. Like imagine prosthetics that are actually made from living tissue that can seamlessly integrate with the body.
Yeah, so no more bulky, uncomfortable prosthetics.
Right. And they're even working on combining bioprinting with cybernetics, which is basically the integration of electronic components with living tissue.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice? I mean, what kind of cybernetic bioenhancements are we talking about here?
Well, for example, imagine bioprinted lungs with built-in sensors and nanofilters that can actually clean the air you breathe before it even gets into your body. Or replacement bionic eyeballs with like built-in zoom capabilities or even infrared vision.
Okay, the infrared vision thing, that's straight out of a comic book.
Yeah, I know, right? And one of our sources actually mentioned this archaeologist who received a bionic cornea after losing his sight. And after his vision was restored, he started having all these vivid hallucinations. He claimed he could see the past and uncover hidden secrets.
Wow, so it's like the technology was actually messing with his perception of reality. It's pretty freaky.
Yeah, it definitely raises some interesting questions about how technology might impact our consciousness. But moving on from what's happening inside our bodies, let's talk about how bioengineering is starting to change the structures we inhabit. And that leads us to the concept of living architecture.
Okay, living architecture. I'm intrigued. Break it down for me.
Well, imagine buildings that are actually constructed from bioengineered materials that can self-repair, purify the air, absorb pollutants, and even reproduce. Like, we're talking about buildings that are essentially alive.
So, like, what kind of materials are we talking about here?
Well, they're drawing inspiration from all sorts of things in nature. Like,
Okay.
they're using gecko-inspired adhesives and eco-concrete that's based on the structure of coral reefs. And they're even working on biological batteries that use bacteria to store and generate energy.
It's like the building itself is a living organism. It's so elegant, so self-sustaining.
Yeah, it's a really cool concept. But there's also this dark side to it. There's this idea of forced obsolescence, where these biomaterials might be engineered to degrade after a certain period, so you have to keep replacing them.
Ah, so even in this futuristic bioengineered world, we can't escape the consumerism cycle.
Right. But the integration of biology into our environment goes beyond just the structural level. Like, they're talking about using bioprinting to create bioart, living, evolving artworks that can decorate your home.
So instead of a static painting on your wall, you have this constantly changing living masterpiece.
Mm.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah. And then for coastal cities that are dealing with rising sea levels, they're developing living sea walls made from genetically engineered corals and mussels. These walls can actually grow and self-repair, so they provide a much more dynamic defense against the ocean.
It's like working with nature instead of fighting against it.
Exactly. And speaking of working with nature, let's talk about how they're using bioluminescence to light up the world.
Okay, bioluminescence. So we're talking about using like glowing plants and bacteria to replace electric streetlights.
Basically, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
they're engineering plants, bacteria, and algae that emit their own light, just like fireflies or deep-sea creatures.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is that a lot of these organisms also purify the air at the same time.
So it's like natural lighting that also cleans the environment.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a really cool idea. But one of our sources actually mentioned this small town where the bioluminescent organisms they were using suddenly stopped working and the whole town was plunged into darkness.
Oh no, what happened?
Well, nobody knows for sure, but there are all these theories about biohacking and environmental contamination. It just shows that even with these seemingly perfect biological solutions, there's always the potential for things to go wrong.
Yeah, that's a good point. And speaking of biohacking, our sources also mentioned this robotics company that's developing a robot with bioluminescent skin. So like glowing human skin might not be that far off.
Yeah, it seems like once we figure out how to do something in nature, we're pretty quick to try to apply it to ourselves. But speaking of pushing the boundaries, let's delve into the world of biohackers and cyberpunkers.
Okay, so this is where things get a little bit more underground, right? We're talking about people who are experimenting with biology and technology outside of the usual scientific and governmental frameworks.
Exactly. And the stuff they're doing is pretty wild. Like, they're implanting microchips under their skin, they're tattooing themselves with digital inks that can display information. They're even building what they call biocomputers out of biomaterials and living neural tissue.
Biocomputers. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds super futuristic.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. And then there are these cyberpunkers who are hacking and modifying their own brain implants for unauthorized neural experiences.
Whoa, so they're basically messing with their own minds.
Yeah, pretty much. And some of them are even using their own DNA as storage devices, like biological hard drives.
That's crazy. So it's like nature's own data storage system.
Right. And then there's this whole black market that's emerging around these new biological substances. Like, they're talking about bioengineered grapes that can ferment into wine really quickly, unregulated foods that are pest resistant, disease resistant, and allergy free.
Allergy-free food. That would be a game changer.
Right. And they're also talking about self-replenishing microfoods containers that are made from living organisms that constantly regenerate their contents.
So like you never run out of food. That's both amazing and a little bit creepy.
Yeah, it definitely has some sci-fi vibes. And then there are the cryonic punks who are trying to freeze and revive bodies.
It's like the ultimate life hack.
Right. And then there are the rumors of chimeras, animals with genes from multiple species. It's like something straight out of mythology.
So if we're talking about like centaurs and griffins and stuff.
Well, maybe not that extreme, but you get the idea. It's just another example of how bioengineering is blurring the lines between what we consider natural and what we consider artificial.
Right. And as this technology advances, it's really raising some fundamental questions about what it means to be human. Like, our sources mentioned that some corporations are actually planning the obsolescence of older bionic prosthetic models, so people have to keep upgrading.
Yeah, and that raises a lot of ethical questions, like who owns your body if parts of it are constantly being replaced with newer, more expensive technology?
Right. It's like the ultimate form of planned obsolescence.
Mm.
But on the other hand, the advancements in bioprinted prosthetics are pretty amazing. They're talking about prosthetics that can fully integrate with the nervous system so you can actually feel things and control them with your thoughts.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. And of course, the military is all over this technology. They're talking about using bionic limbs to create super soldiers.
I mean, that's not exactly surprising. But on a more positive note, our sources also mention this paralyzed boy who was able to walk again using a bioexoskeleton.
Yeah, it's really incredible to see how this technology can be used to help people. And it's interesting to note that all bionic prosthetics and bioexoskeletons are registered and tracked.
I guess that makes sense given the potential for misuse.
Yeah.
But speaking of potentially controversial technologies, let's talk about advanced artificial womb technology. We're talking about pod devices for external pregnancy and gestation, which is also known as ectogenesis.
Right. And this is a technology that has the potential to completely revolutionize human reproduction. I mean, in a world where infertility rates are rising, artificial wombs could offer a solution for people who are unable to conceive naturally.
Yeah, and our sources mention that some wealthy individuals are already using these large-scale womb farms to have children. And some governments are even setting up their own facilities, especially in countries with declining birth rates.
Right. And then there are the more out there theories. Like one of our sources mentioned this rumor of a dictator who's trying to achieve immortality by using artificial wombs to create countless offspring.
It's like a sci-fi dystopia come to life.
Yeah, it's pretty freaky. But beyond human reproduction, artificial wombs are also being considered for things like space colonization, military applications, and even reviving endangered species.
So it's a technology with a huge range of potential applications.
Exactly. And speaking of pushing the boundaries of biology, our sources also mention these experiments in extended gestation, where they keep a developing organism in an artificial womb for longer than normal, supposedly to enhance cognitive and physical development.
So they're basically trying to create super babies.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but they're definitely trying to see if they can manipulate the natural developmental process.
Right. And speaking of manipulating nature, let's talk about the rapidly growing field of biohybrid robots.
Yeah, this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and for good reason. These are robots that integrate biological tissue, which gives them incredible flexibility and energy efficiency.
So like robots that move and operate more like living organisms.
Exactly. And one company is actually developing what they call biomimetic robots, robots that are designed to mimic living organisms. They say these robots are for environmental monitoring and biological research, but some people are concerned that they could become invasive species.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. And there's also the potential for these robots to be used for espionage, like drones that look and act exactly like birds.
Right, and there's also the concern that these robots could be used to spread harmful bacteria and viruses.
It's like a biological weapon in robot form.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. But on the other hand, our sources also pointed out that these biohybrid robots could be really useful in the event of a major disaster, like a nuclear meltdown. They could be used to scavenge resources, rescue survivors, and clean up hazardous materials.
So they could actually save lives in a really dangerous situation.
Exactly. And there's even this idea that the first biorobot could become a restorer of extinct animals, carrying DNA and basically birthing lost species back into existence.
That's a really cool idea. It's like using technology to undo the damage we've done to the planet.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. But finally, let's talk about the emergence of what some people are calling neo-humans. These are individuals who have been so significantly modified by biotechnology that they're considered a new category of human.
Okay, so we're talking about like transhumanism, right?
Mm.
People who are using technology to enhance their bodies and minds.
Exactly. And the examples from our sources are pretty wild. Like, they mentioned the first person to become a human insect repellent by engineering their own pheromones.
So like, you never have to worry about mosquitoes again. That's pretty awesome.
Right. And then there's this singer who bioengineered her vocal cords and resonating chambers to give her an inhuman range of sounds.
Wow, so she's like a living musical instrument.
Exactly. And then there's this biohacker who's turned himself into a living canvas with skin pigments that respond to light, temperature, and mood.
So he's like a walking work of art. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And then there are people who are growing food directly on their own bodies, and marine biohackers who are giving themselves bioluminescence and gill-like modifications so they can breathe underwater.
So they're basically turning themselves into mermaids.
Well, Well, sort of. And then there's this new age Wolverine who's given himself incredibly strong bones and rapid regeneration using bioengineered collagen and reptile-derived
So
tissues.
he's like a real-life superhero.
Yeah, pretty much. And
Yeah.
then there are people who are bioengineering themselves to reverse aging by manipulating their telomeres, and one person even claims to have split their consciousness through organic brain augmentations.
Split their consciousness.
Yeah.
That sounds like something straight out of a science fiction novel.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. And the most altruistic example they mentioned was the first person who's capable of healing others through touch by transferring regenerative cells.
So like a real-life healer? That's incredible.
Yeah, it really shows the potential of this technology to not just enhance our lives, but to actually change what it means to be human.
It's like we're on the verge of a whole new era of human evolution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as our sources put it, biotechnology is the drafting table where nature's blueprint meets human design. It's the recoding of life itself, and this is just the beginning.
Wow. So from bioprinted organs to neo-humans, the scope of what we've talked about today is just mind-boggling. We've gone from the microscopic level of cells
Yeah.
all the way up to the global scale of reshaping ecosystems.
Right. And I think the big takeaway here is that this technology has the potential to both solve some of the world's biggest problems and create entirely new ones.
Yeah, so the double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah.
So listener, as you're processing all of this, we want you to think about the implications. What kind of world are we creating here? And what does it mean for our future?
Right. Like, what are the ethical and societal implications of all this? And what does it even mean to be human in a world where we can manipulate our own biology in such profound ways?
Those are big questions, and we don't have all the answers. But hopefully this deep dive has given you a glimpse into the incredible possibilities and the potential pitfalls of this rapidly evolving field. And if there's anything we've talked about today that's particularly piqued your interest, we encourage you to do your own research and keep exploring, because this is just the tip of the iceberg, and the future of biology and technology is only going to get more fascinating from here.
Definitely. Buckle up, everyone. It's going to be a while.